pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. And then, Mr. Wolpat, would you please call the roll?
Brian Wopat here. Barb Wench.
Here.
Alan Fox.
Here.
Jennifer Deek.
She's excused.
Gary Dunlap.
Here.
Chris Lau.
Excused.
Bridget Todd Robbins.
Here.
Rebecca Reber.
Here. Thank you. And with 5 of the 7 board members present, I do declare a quorum. Approval of the agenda. I note that the agenda has been posted, distributed, and sent to the local media. With this in mind, are there any changes to the agenda? Okay. Entertain a motion to approve the agenda as published.
So moved.
Second.
Thanks, Barb. Barb has second to approve the agenda as published. Any discussion? Oh, okay. Hearing none. All those in favor of the motion to approve the agenda as published, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, please signify by saying no. The motion to approve the published agenda has passed. And we do not have any public participation at this time, Stacy? Nope. Thank you. So district administrators report. Chris, Dr. Bermuda?
Yeah, I have 3 items tonight. The first one is I just want to say a huge thanks to our Holmen Area Foundation Activities Department. They had a very successful golf outing to raise funds for our Activities Department, and the foundation, which they give a lot of money back to our community and our staff within the school district with the money they raised. So it was a beautiful day. They had to reschedule, but ended up having a beautiful day this last Wednesday. So look forward to seeing how successful they were in the future. Also, most of our families and our residents of our Holmen School District should have received a survey in their mailbox or by email and we ask, if you haven't, if you please take the survey. The board and us here in the school district, a lot of feedback and information necessary to know if we should go to a referendum in the future in that. The questions asked on the survey don't necessarily represent what would be the referendum, but more so it just gives us an idea as to what to gauge the perceptions of our community and about the different options and the tax tolerance. So that's open till July 1st. And then lastly, we have starting for our elementary and middle school students on July 11th. And I just want you to know our transportation department has been working very hard securing drivers, and we went from going, oh my goodness, how are we going to get all the kids to summer school and these rides might be long, to finding a couple drivers, which has helped. But anyone out there plug into. Thank you.
Thank you. And then, Mark Engel would like to introduce Holmen High School and Holmen Middle School. Who's the activities director surviving?
That's okay. So I'm here to officially recognize our officials for all the work they do, our spring officials. I thought we had signed for that. We can't run our activities that we do without our officials who go in all kinds of weather. The spring was crazy. We were in rain. May, it was cold as well. April was very rainy, and then finally we get to May and it was very hot. So these folks really do our kids a service by being at all these events and providing these opportunities for us. There is a long go to our events, softball, soccer officials we really appreciate because they're so hard to find. So just want to thank them if they're watching and let them know we appreciate all they do.
Thank you, Mark.
Anybody have any questions, comments? Lots of family names or same last names, so.
Yes,
son and
officiating
father,
seems to
yeah.
run in the family, yes.
The Schultz family, there's 3 of those, so, yep, thank you. And Mr. Engler, there's still a need for officials? I think there were last year also.
Yes, the need for officials is actually quite high. There's been a large decrease since the pandemic. Officials, a lot of older people that were officiating get out of the profession, and we are working as an organization to get new officials involved. So
Okay.
it's still a challenge. If any of you fill out that application form and jump into officiating, I'd be happy to hire you.
So you could be a bus driver driving to an event and then officiate and then drive them back.
You could, look at that. Multitasking.
That's a new program.
That's another new program.
Yeah.
Yes, in Holmen only. All right.
Thanks. Anybody have
Any
questions?
other questions?
Okay, and then on reports and discussion, I believe that Director of Transportation, Dan Garrett, is going to present on parent transportation contracts.
Kim's excited.
Usually it's me that messes up, Kim.
Hello.
I'm just going over parent contracts this year, and I don't know if it's just the changes that have been happening lately, or it's one of our programs is offering all day for now at one of our pro schools. So received one request, but no official request in writing as of now. So the dollar amount that I had on here was if all 18 students that we recognized are in the program, if they would all request funds, that's what it would be. But as of this time, we have 0. I know there's some calls out, and I'm working with one family, but right now there's no official contacts. And like I said, several changes are happening, and I'm just trying to find out what that'll lead into. And I would also like to mention, school buses. Just a few months ago, we had a referendum for, not a referendum, but school buses on our, sorry, was it in May?
April, I think.
Permission to go ahead and purchase 2 new school buses. Found out shortly after that there's a 12 to 14 month. So we're not do 23 school year, the 23-24 school year. So we're looking at in the same order, and as you mentioned before, drivers, our summer school route last year we had 14 down to, so there's 4 buses. We were able to change, not going down every cul-de-sac, picking up on different corners instead of every street. So whatever we can do to make it more efficient. Looking at maybe 5 drivers compared to what we've had in the past. So if you know of anybody or are interested in applying for a bus driver or a van driver, please find out during that parade. Any questions?
We did, so be a driver, can you just be a van driver, or can you?
As van drivers, we do have several people that are van for us, and we had one gentleman who just started a few months ago. He picked up all of our summer school van routes. So we thank Ted.
We also the CDL driving. We do that for them as well, and reimburse them for their cost associated with taking the test and things, so that we can get them on board.
Okay.
We'll provide on the road, so we haven't had fell yet. So.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, Kim Edwards, notification to parents and guardians of school board adopted student academic standards.
All
All right. Good evening. So each academic standards that we'll be using for the upcoming annually as an agenda item. This report and consent item is to provide education to parents and guardians. The School District of Holmen is requesting to adopt the next generation science standards and the Wisconsin academic standards for all of the areas. That we would not constitute any change. Any questions or comments? Okay. The next for your consideration is we have some field experience contracts for your consideration from a couple of universities that we have worked with for your consideration as well. So we have MOU Cora, who 23 school year. Then we have Education also has a contract for you to consider. And then brand new, we've heard from Grand Canyon University, who has a partnership with us through 2023. All of the contracts read pretty similar. Okay, thank you.
And then Julie Holman will present on the fund balance designation. And this is going to appear on tonight's consent. This is on tonight's consent agenda.
Good evening. So tonight I have two different sort of budget items. One is and so that's the fund balance designation. And then the next one that I will be presenting on is a preliminary budget for 22-23. So as part of sound management of the district's fund equity, the school board's asked annually to take action to designate the purpose for the financial resources in fund equity as of June 30th. This is a requirement under GASB 54 reporting guidelines to identify an estimated year-end balances and classify them into 5 different categories. Actual fund balances will be reported in our annual financial statements upon completion of the audit. The estimated fund equity totals are identified by fund and fund balance type in the table you see on the screen. The fund equity may be assigned into 2 categories, either spendable and non-spendable. And within the spendable category, there are further classifications that depict the relative strength of the spending constraints placed on the purposes for which the resources are to be used. So I'll just go through each of these for you with further explanation. So we have within the general fund, we have 5 categories. We do not have anything in the non-spendable category. In restricted, we have about 1.5 million estimated fund balance for June 30th. This is our sinking fund balance and the reserves for the Briggs and McHugh Road participation in that project. You recently approved the MOU for that project. We're pretty excited that we finally get to engage in spending that money and creating greater safety out here on McHugh and Briggs. But those reserves have been, that was a 2017 referendum. So we have reserved that money since 2017, and it's and a restricted fund balance, excuse me. This you will see on the preliminary spent in the 22-23 fiscal year. It's being reserved one more year. The committed but spendable is reserved each year for our post-employment obligations for our retirees. And this year as well, I've added in the balance for primarily some projects, buildings and grounds projects, that were intended to be done in 21, 22, and now due to acquisition and delays in shipment of equipment and installation, all of those costs only, short of like $10,000, are going to occur in the 22, we hope, in the 22, 23 fiscal year. So the bid, primarily the bid that I'm talking about is the one from December for the HVAC projects at the middle school and Viking. Several hundred thousands of dollars, and so those have been removed from the current budget, placed in reserve, and will be put back in the expenditure budget for 22-23 fiscal year. The assigned, also spendable category within the general fund includes a balance for payroll, benefits, and other payable obligations prior to our September state aid receipts. So we get the bulk of our state aid from Wisconsin in September and June, but our up until mid-September before we see aid through our revenue, and so we reserve fund balance in order to pay for those expenses for a few months before we see that first aid payment. And then we have the unassigned, estimated at just over $9 million. Within the gift account is Fund 21. This is also our scholarship account, so it's all fundraising, donations, and scholarship. It is reserved specifically for the purposes that it was fundraised for. We have over 180 activity accounts, plus we have scholarship reserves, and we estimate that gift account fund balance to be just over $1 million on June 30th. The debt service is restricted specifically for principal and interest due on the bonds that we have on our books. We still have outstanding bonds on both the Prairie View building and the high school addition and remodel, which is our latest bonding in 2018. The capital projects is restricted for the long-term capital improvement trust fund, and that is Fund 46. And then food service is its own fund, revenue and expense, and Mr. Gasper, the director for food service, estimates about a $1.2 million fund balance as of June 30th. And lastly, we have the community service fund. This one was rather new a couple of years ago as we partnered with our Boys and Girls Club for the Sail for Success program. And so we estimate that there'll be about a $50,000 reserve in the Fund 80, which is really helpful because this is a levy revenue, and so we don't certify our levy till November, and we don't get proceeds from the levy until starting in January. So they again have expenses July through December before we start seeing levy proceeds. So this has been helpful to cover those expenses for the 6 months before the levy proceeds begin. In addition to this information, I also provided for you a document regarding fund balance. That's a DPI document. It's a pretty quick read, and it just helps remind people that fund balance does not equal cash. Cash is part of fund balance, but so are other things such as state and federal receivables. So if the state owes us money on June 30th, that's part of the fund balance, but it's technically not spendable because it's not here yet. So just a reference for you there in regards to what makes up fund balance is helpful. Any questions? All right. Can I go on to the next one then?
Yes, please. Preliminary budget,
Okay.
2022, 2023.
Okay. So now we move into July 1. This is a preliminary budget. It is not on the consent agenda. We typically do not have the board approve the preliminary budget because it's just very early. And with everything else going on in the world right now, it's still very uncertain, but need to give you some idea of what we're planning for 22-23. In August, the proposed budget comes for board approval, and then in October is the original budget, and that's where you take action on the one that's kind of locked for the year until we have future revisions. So the development of the 22-23 budget forecast began with the variables that were presented in January of 22. Rising inflation has caused the need to increase some input variables for wages, benefits, utilities, equipment, supplies, and fuel specifically. In May, the board did approve a 4.7% base wage increase for both our hourly and our administrative and director employee groups. And we continue to work with the HEA to finalize the wages for the educators for 22-23. The preliminary budget focuses primarily on funds 10, 27, 39, 46, 50, and 80. For those that are new on the board, I'll just quickly remind you of what those are. 10 is our operational fund. It's the largest. It's called the general fund. 27 is special education. 39 is our debt service. 46 is long-term capital trust. 50 is school nutrition, and 80 is community service. And then we also have Fund 21, I just talked about with the fund balance designation, and that is our gift and scholarship account. Fund 21 has not been updated yet in the preliminary budget. It is unique in the fact that they carry over all their individual balances for those fundraisers, and so it takes a bit to reconcile everything after June 30 to rebuild the budget for the following year. State and local tax levy revenue in the general fund is calculated using the revenue limit formula and is based on a 5-year trend enrollment projection. The 5-year trend model uses the grade progression ratios from the last 5 years and also looking at the number of births in the district area to project what future enrollment would look like. The actual 22-23 student membership and revised enrollment projections will be updated after the September annual count. So in the state of Wisconsin, we count kids the third Friday of September, second Friday in January. So after September 16th, we'll have a better idea, and then that goes into our aid calculation at the state level. The COVID-19 pandemic and current economic environment continues to create much uncertainty. Supply, equipment, and vehicle acquisition challenges have required the district to revise, like I talked about, the 21-22 expenditures downward significantly due to those delays, and so those have been added back into the preliminary budget for 22-23. I gave you the example of the middle school and Viking HVAC projects. Mr. Garrett gave you the example of 2 buses to the tune of $225,000 that we may or may not see in the next year. Just to piggyback on that, we're also working to decide if we need to bid again earlier, in which case we might get 4 in, 16 months instead of 2 and 2, so that we are not falling behind on our fleet replacement. Since the beginning, fund balance for 22-23 fiscal year is the prior year ending fund balance. It's important to note that the ending fund balance is based on the estimated fourth quarter revisions. I will bring a final fourth quarter budget to you in July for action or consent. But what's being presented tonight is based on estimated fourth quarter revisions. Fund balance again includes cash equivalents, non-cash components, taxes receivable, federal reimbursement receivable, and payables. So another reference to what is fund balance. Assumptions that have been put into the preliminary budget include no change in the current level per pupil categorical aid, no change in the current level per pupil revenue limit, no change from the current special education state reimbursement rate. Those 3 things are part of the annual. We're in the second year of the biennium for the state of Wisconsin legislative decisions, and those things pretty much did not change for 2 years, and so we're entering into the second year of that biennium decision. Wage expenditure increases year on year significantly exceed the July 1st, 2022 CPIU of 4.7%. One reason for that is the gracious January 2022 increase of wages for our staff. So combining that permanent increase plus July 1 increases, we will exceed a 4.7 year-on-year increase for wages. Negotiations again with educators are unsettled at this time. Initial estimates are included but will require revision. Employer expenditures for WRS, which is our Wisconsin retirement system, at 6.5%, and the Social Security and Medicare at 7.65% as a percentage of wage has been included in the preliminary budget. We received a 2% group health insurance premium increase for the next plan year beginning July 1. And then we do have included in this preliminary budget about $1.2 million of ESSER funds. ESSER is the federal money for relief from pandemic. secondary education relief, or primary and secondary, I'm forgetting the acronym, sorry. And there's lots of components to that, but we estimate that there'll be a little under 400,000 left in the ESSER 2 that needs to be spent by 2023. And then we have 3 different pots of ESSER 3 money, and initially we are only including the first pot of money. ESSER 3 does not need to be spent until 2024, so we're still planning on some of the other dollars. We just, I'll talk about this too in the presentation, the PowerPoint, but we just received word recently on ESSER 3 EBIS, which is evidence-based instruction. And so we have to create a plan just specifically around those dollars. It may or may not be in the 22-23 budget. It doesn't have to be spent till 24. So working through that with Kim and Jill and Dr. Mueller, trying to figure out how we're going to plan for that. All of the ESSER dollars are one time, and they are on a reimbursement basis. So it's not sitting in fund balance. We have to spend it and then submit claims to be reimbursed for those dollars. The general fund estimated revenue budget for 22-23 is $52.6 million, and the expenditure budget for the general fund is estimated at $54.5 million. The preliminary budget has a deficit of $1.8 million, meaning expenditures exceed revenue, which is our plan to spend down some of that fund balance. This represents 3.4% of the general fund expenditure budget. The estimated fund balance next June 30th of 23 is about $17.6 million. This represents 32.3% of fund balance as a percentage of expenditures. I will go through and show you some charts and talk about the board goal again on fund balance and where this will put us for next year. So you received in your board documents a copy of the preliminary budget in DPI format. It's a 5-page document. I'm just sharing on the screen snippets of each of the revenue and expenditure areas. So we'll start at the beginning. The first 8 lines of the budget format include the general fund balance. If you look across the screen, we have the audited 21, fiscal year 21, the revised draft for quarter 4 of the current year, fiscal year 22, and then a preliminary budget in the far column for 22-23. On line 8 is the estimated total fund balance. You notice in the middle column of numbers an increase up to $19.4 million. Again, that is an estimate. We'll know after the audit for sure, or closer to the audit. They'll be on site a week, the end of July, so we can get closer to our trial balance numbers between now and then. But again, the reason that that's going up is quite a bit is because of things that had to be removed from the current year budget and moved to next year. We still have those commitments to those vendors for that equipment or for that work. So beginning with revenue in the general fund, this is the subtotal, line 17, of local sources. Local sources are primarily property taxes based on the levy that was certified, is certified in November. And so we're looking at about $11.9 million in taxes for next year. And then we also have things like school activity income, so gate receipts for co-curriculars or other activities, some interest on investments, and then just general other sources of revenue. What could be in like line 16, object or source 290 would be, well, if we recycled something or disposed of something. We do a lot of recycling in buildings and grounds and technology and transportation as well. Sometimes we get a little money for that. And then other chargebacks or refunds, like a work comp dividend that comes in the following year would fall into other sources of revenue. So total local sources estimated at $12.1 million for next year. We move on to lines 10 through 22, and these are sources of revenue from other school districts in Wisconsin. This is the dollar amount, $1.7 million, for students that attend Holmen public schools that are not our resident students. And so this is your open enrollment in transfer. The estimated open enrollment transfer from the Department of Public Instruction for next year is $8,224 per student and $13,076 for pupils with disabilities. This is an increase from $8,161 and $13,013 from current year. Next is the subtotal of state sources of revenue. Line 33 is our primary state source, the general aid. The revenue limit is a component of state general aid and local levy in the general fund, and so we're capped at the combination of the two. So if the aid goes up, the levy is going to go down based on what we're allowed to bring in for those sources of revenue under the per pupil revenue limit. So if we see this, it'll change between the two based on enrollment, and they're not changing the revenue limit per pupil for next year. So based on the 3-year average enrollment and membership, that'll shift, and then there's other components that go into the state aid. So we kind of go back and forth at this time, like how much is going to be aid, how much is going to be levy. But right now we're projecting about $33.6 million in aid for next year. And then line 38 is other revenues. This is our per pupil categorical aid. That is aid outside of the revenue limit formula, and it's $749 per pupil based on our 3-year average membership. So total subtotal for state sources of revenue for the general fund next year is $37 million. And then we have our federal sources. Spoke about this a little bit already with the ESSER dollars. Other components that would be in here budgeted for next year include our Title 1, 2, 3, 4. We don't have 5, right? Title 1 through 4 are all Fund 10 regular education federal program awards, and these are part of the federal sources. But you can see quickly from 2021 to 2023 the influx of federal dollars. Again, those are one time on a reimbursement basis. Total revenues estimated for next year, 22-23, are $52.6 million. Next, we move on to expenditures. Lines 60 through 66 are the, we call them the 100 level functions, but they're really all of our different curricular levels. So most all of our teaching staff and all of the educational assistants, wages and benefits are coded here, as well as all the classroom supplies. What would not be here would be support services like counselors, nurses, guidance, any administration, and other programs. But this is your core instructional area within the budget, and we are estimated a subtotal of instruction of just under $24 million for next year. So next is the support services I talked about, broken up: pupil services, instructional services, general administration, school building administration. So for example, line 70 is all of our school offices, the administrative assistants, the principals, anyone working within those offices. Business administration, line 71, actually includes a lot of things. It's not just business services upstairs, which some might think, but it's everything, including buildings and grounds, facilities, and transportation. All funds falls under a $250,000 within our coding in the accounting. We have central services, insurance and judgments, so risk management, property, casualty, crime, educator, legal liability, all of those go into line 73. And then other support services, which includes technology, which is in 2 different locations, but technology is in the other support services, line 75, for an estimated total support services next year of just under $19 million. Next, we have the non-program transactions. The first item on there is over $6 million. That is the transfer to our special education fund, Fund 27. That fund cannot go into a deficit position, so every year we have a transfer to make them whole or make them zero in fund balance. That is estimated at $6.2 million next year. There is money in there as well for transfers to Fund 46. So it's about 6 million to Fund 27 and 250,000 to Fund 46, which is the long-term capital improvement trust fund. Instructional service payments, line 78. This is our open enrollment out and voucher total, looking at about 5.25 million. Again, the amount of money per pupil is the same as the open enrollment in that I discussed earlier. But it just fluctuates a little bit every year based on how many students open and enroll out to either other public schools in the state of Wisconsin or those that are eligible for vouchers for private school support. And so we're looking at almost 5.3 million again next year in open enrollment and voucher payments. The total for non-program transactions estimated at 11.5 million. Total general fund expenditures then for next year are estimated currently at $54.5 million. Again, with some plan to spend down some of our excess fund balance, expenditures do exceed revenue in the general fund. Before I move on to, this is the summary, sorry. So we have fund balance, which was the top slide, and then you can see the revenues and the expenditures there in the bottom two rows, and then compared to current year estimates and then prior year audited. So every year in our annual report that is shared and published in October at the annual meeting, Dr. Mueller presents on the annual report. We also include a fund balance chart, historical chart. This is always lagging because we do compare to peers, and fund balance is not available to us until everybody's audited, submitted to the state in December, and then usually available the following March. So it's a good 9 months after the fiscal year closes. So this is always lagging data. The red diamond is Holmen. You can see more recent growth. Several years ago, the board adopted a fund balance goal of 26.2%, I think it is. And so the arrows are kind of the upper and lower limit of that goal. You can see we currently are exceeding that goal. We have certainly seen growth in fund balance over the last 2 years with closure and virtual learning and acquisition issues, things like that. So there has been some growth, but we have plans for some spend down as well. So this is lagging data. It is as of June 30th, 2020 with our comparables of both peer and state average. So next I will move on to the Special Projects Fund. In Holmen, this is referring to Fund 21, which is our gifts, fundraising, donations, and scholarships. And as mentioned earlier, this is not going to be budgeted until it's all reconciled because each of those 140 plus groups gets to carry over their balance, and then it's rebudgeted once it's reconciled as of June 30th, so we know what their starting amount is that they can spend next year. So that is why columns, the second and third column, are identical. Special Education Fund is Fund 27. Beginning in any fund balance is 0 based on that interfund transfer requirement, and the estimated revenue and expense for next year is $9,263,000. There is more detail in your 5-page handout. I'll just give you the breakdown there. Debt service is Fund 39. We do not have a Fund 38. That would be non-voter approved referendum. Holmen does not have that. Some districts still have that on their books, but our debt is voter approved through referendum. And Fund 39 is where we account for the principal and interest payments annually and the levy proceeds to support it each year. And so for next year, estimating a $5.514 million in revenue. So that is the tax levy plus some interest earnings, And then expenditures are estimated also at a very similar number at $5,510,000. At this time, this does include $1.5 million in additional debt defeasance. If you recall, those members that were on the board earlier this year, we defeased $1.5 million in debt, expended it this year. That goes into an escrow account, and that reduces our final payment and saves on interest on the debt on the high school bonds. And so that's one way to help prevent your mill rate from falling when you go to certify your tax levy. And we're also prepaying debt and have interest savings to the community. And so this strategy is currently planned for 22-23 again. We'll see if we need to do that or not. Next is the capital projects. That should say Fund 46. My apologies. Fund 42 was the fund that we tracked all of the improvements at the high school over the last several years. So that would be the construction fund. Within the Fund 40s, we only have Fund 46 now, and that is the Long-Term Capital Improvement Trust. So we started this 2 years ago. Just a reminder, or for those of you that are new, a Long-Term Capital Improvement Trust Fund is to set aside money for items on our 10-year capital improvements plan. It could be equipment, it could be projects, repairs, things that need to be improved, but there's a stipulation that you cannot actually spend the money for the first 5 years. And so this would be year 3 of the contribution. When we contribute it, it's a transfer from the general fund, and it reduces, if we do all the project in the general fund, it has a larger impact on our shared cost the following year, or which is the aid we receive from the state. They share in that cost. If we slowly put the funds aside, it's considered expended each year of the transfer, and so you don't see a big increase and then dip in your aid the following year, because you're setting it aside a little bit at a time and then spending it out of Fund 46 instead of a big project out of Fund 10. So that decision and resolution passed a couple of years ago. I'm proposing a $250,000 transfer from the general fund, as I mentioned earlier when we were looking at interfund transfers. And the reason you don't see any expenses over here on the far right is because we can't spend the money yet. Next is the food service Fund 50 revenue and expenses. Revenues estimated at $3,283,000. Expenses estimated at $3,578,000. This budget is managed by Mr. Gasper, our food service director. And he is intentionally also spending down some of his fund balance. So with free meals for all the last couple years, even with the challenges in acquisition, they were able to grow their fund balance, and now they need to spend some of it down. So he's expecting his expenditures to exceed his revenue next year to draw down the fund balance in school nutrition. The goal within that fund balance specifically is to have at least 3 months of expenditures. As a reminder to the board, if they go in the hole, we have to make a transfer from the general fund, so we really like food service to be in the black. And lastly, we have the Community Service Fund, Fund 80. This again is our participation and financial support for the Sale to Success program at our BGC. It is accounted for in community service because it is open to all resident students, not just those that attend the School District of Holmen. And so we help, the community helps support that program through an annual tax levy. This will be our 3rd year. You can see very little 2 years ago. 22-23 will be the 3rd year of levying for that, to support that program at the BGC in town. Any questions on preliminary fund budget?
So,
Thank you.
thank you. And now on to consent agenda items. For the consent agenda, the board has been furnished with background materials on each item or has discussed at a previous meeting. These will be acted upon with one vote without discussion. If a board member wants to discuss any item, it will be pulled out of the consent agenda and will be voted on separately. I would entertain a motion to approve the consent agenda as provided. Can I get a motion?
So moved.
Thank you, Brian. Anybody to second? Second. Thank you. Is there any discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor of approving the consent agenda items, please signify by saying yes.
Yes.
Sorry. Those opposed? And we go on to board member reports and discussion. First, I will call upon board members and ask you to present any comments or committee reports you have, and we'll start with Brian.
I have nothing at this time.
Thanks, Brian. Barb?
I would just like to acknowledge that we continue to have many opportunities for students in our district to gain some worldly experience. And it has been publicly, I've seen it on social media. 2 weeks ago, we had 8th graders in Florida for a science trip. We had a group of high schoolers that were in Paris, France. This week, we have another group of high school students that are in Greece and Italy.
Lucky kids.
Yeah.
Anything else? All right, thank you. Alan?
I'd just like to say it's really good to hear about the McHugh and Briggs Road finally getting something done with that. I know that the budget was approved, but to see that it's actually being put in motion is really good. And kind of just piggybacking off of Mrs. Wench's thing. I was actually on that French trip. It was why I wasn't at the last meeting. And it was a very good learning experience for a lot of people. A lot of the kids, especially the underclassmen, learned to refine their French and behave a bit more maturely.
Thank you. Gary, do you have anything?
Just that I was at a committee this week with the athletic department that we hired a really good volleyball coach. He coached at West Salem and played volleyball and collegiate volleyball himself. He's a good coach. I think he's a great fit, and it's really exciting to see him come on board. That's all I have.
Thanks, Gary. And then Bridget.
Yeah, I just wanted to say this afternoon I began my new board member orientation and was able to meet with some leadership from our district, and I just have immense gratitude for the level of leadership that we have in this district. It was apparent from meeting with instructional services, student services, nutrition, and facilities today that all of our services are really done through a lens of what's in the best interest of our students, and I was really excited and grateful to see that. I also wanted to mention that I had the opportunity to work with Holmen students last weekend at the Juneteenth celebration. There were students from the Diverse Cultural Alliance volunteering all day for that event, and just a great example of servant leadership. And great representation of our school district.
Thank you. And then I don't have anything for tonight except for just another reminder for the survey if you've received that at home to complete that. And then just really appreciate all the officials that are out there, and if we need any more, I don't know, not to contact Mr. Engler. We have bus driver openings if you're retiring anytime soon.
Thinking about 50.
Okay. Do I get a referral bonus? Okay. So if there's any other business that needs to come before the board, excuse me, I have to back up. Board meeting schedule. July 11th is a regular board meeting at 7 o'clock, and then July 25th is another board meeting at 7 o'clock. Okay. All right. Is there any other business that needs to come before the board?
Adjourn.
No? I'd like to adjourn the meeting.
Your turn.
Anybody want to? Say that again? Gary, anybody second?
I'll second.
Thanks, Barb. Barb seconded to adjourn the meeting at
51.
7:51. Motion carried. Oops.